All right, today we're going to be looking at Norway, the Kingdom of Norway. And so we're going to kind of do it like we did last time, talk about different aspects of the country, look at a few different maps, talk about the people, talk about the history, the geography, any pertinent information to the nation of Norway. What I would like for you guys to do this week is to kind of go back, and we're going to do the project thing again. And I'd like for you to do the project about Norway. Sydney, why don't you do something artistic with Norway if you don't mind? Jolie, you're probably going to want to make some kind of food, so if you feel like doing that, that's great. Catherine, I'm going to let you choose, and actually all three of you are free to choose, just kind of going on what we've been doing in the past. But Catherine, if you want to do something, some kind of a project, kind of like you did with Milan, or if you want to make a different kind of food than Jolie, you guys just get together and make sure you do something different, and make sure and have that stuff on Friday. And y'all can either share that with the other students, or you can just kind of have a Norway party together and pretend to be Vikings. So as we continue on today, the first thing we're going to do is have a quiz. So make sure and get out some paper. Oh look, double click to edit. Let's do this. Quiz! Alright, so we're going to have a quiz. And what I would like you guys to do is get a piece of paper. If you need to pause the video, go ahead and do that. I forget whose turn it was to be the video pauser. I think it's Jolie. Anyway, somebody pause the video, get out paper, get pencil, write these things down, and then make sure after you get your answers written to send them to me sometime. I got everybody's emails, text messages last time, or those who sent them, I got them. That's good. So let's do this quiz. All right, question 1. What is the capital of Sweden? Good. All right, capital of Sweden. What languages are spoken in Sweden? Kind of like the Iceland question. It shouldn't be hard. Tell me a little bit about what the geography in Sweden is like. Describe it. Talk about it a little bit. What are the temperatures like? Just give me a little bit of information about what things are like in Sweden, especially the terrain, the topography. I want to know a lot about the topography. How many people are in Sweden? Are there lots? Are there a few? How densely populated is the country? Put that kind of information down for your answer. The more you put, the more points you're going to get. Sounds good. Question 5. Name an interesting fact about Sweden. It actually has to be a fact that we covered in our last video. You can't just make one up. Sweden has bears. Yes, it does. Maybe. Not interesting, however. Lots of places have bears. Something interesting about Sweden that only Sweden has, or something about its geography. It might share it with a neighboring nation or something like that. But let's get an interesting fact down about Sweden. Now, when you're done with that, if you're not done, pause the video. When you're done with that, we're going to go on to talking about Norway. Yay, Norway. All right, we're going to begin by just talking about the location. When you look here on the map, you can see Norway, nice and circled for us. And so what we need to pay attention to is its location. Here's Sweden right there, lovely little place. Iceland over here, Greenland right there. Here's England, there's Europe, United States, Texas. And then you can kind of see how far away it is, and you can see how far north it is. Notice that it is further north than Iceland, which was right underneath the Arctic Circle, and it's a little bit further north than Sweden, which part of Sweden was in the Arctic Circle, which means a great deal of Finland will be in the Arctic Circle. And actually, this chunk right in here, this chunk of land right there, is actually also part of Norway's territory. And so it has pieces of itself that are pretty much going to be tundra. They will be completely frozen almost year-round because they're so far north. And even when it gets sunlight, it doesn't necessarily always thaw. So it's kind of interesting just to locate or see where Sweden is located. And it's going to give us an idea of what kinds of things we can expect. You might also remember that the Scandinavian mountains are going to be running in between or through both Finland or Norway and Sweden. And so as we're looking at this, we can expect to see a lot of topographical changes. And with those topographical changes, there'll be differences in the way people live and what they do, how they live, where they live, and why they live there. Just like we saw last time with Sweden and with other places like Iceland that are very mountainous. And so that's kind of where we're going to begin. Norway or similar to Sweden, is a monarchy. It is a unitary democratic monarchy, and so everything is united. They're going to be brought together. They're going to have the western portion of this Scandinavian peninsula here. We're going to call this the Scandinavian Peninsula. There's Sweden, there's Norway, and over here will be Finland, and this is Russia. So Norway will be bordering Sweden, Finland, and Russia. Makes for interesting politics. They are going to be subarctic and Arctic, because remember, part of it's above the Arctic Circle, part of it's below the Arctic Circle. It's roughly going to have an area of about 148,000 square miles, 149,000 square miles, which means just like Sweden, it's going to be about 2/3, maybe half the size of Texas. And so it's not very big compared to other places. It's not going to be very big. It's going to have 5 million people. It's going to share a long border with Sweden, and it's going to be also bordered by Finland and Russia. And so when we talk about, again, population densities, it's going to be a very sparsely populated country, mostly because it's so far north and people don't like to live there. However, there will be lots of skiers in Norway. Norway always does very well in the Winter Olympics, kind of hard not to when you live in a place that is basically perpetually winter. And that's kind of an introduction to Norway. And the next thing we're going to talk about is the geography of Norway. All right, talking about the geography in Norway. Again, it's going to comprise the western and northern part of the Scandinavian Peninsula, and it's going to have tons of mountains. There are going to be mountains all over the place, and there are going to be fjords, and there's going to be lots, thousands of islands. In fact, the coastline of Scandinavia is just ridiculously long when you start weaving in and out amongst all the fjords and amongst all the islands. It has a coastline that is roughly 16,000 miles when you start going around and you're looking at all the different islands that it's going around. It's just intense, but it's actually not really that long. And so if you actually go along the coast, it's not really that long. Norway will share a 1,000-mile long border with Sweden. Remember, that's the largest contiguous unbroken border in Europe between Norway and Sweden. And again, it's going to have Russia and Finland and Sweden bordering it. It's, again, about 149,000 square miles, and the country will be dominated by mountains and rugged terrain like the fjords, and it's going to be a place where relatively few people live because there aren't very many places where you can live. Some of the most notable features in the geography of Norway are going to be the fjords. In fact, most people, when they joke about Norway, they talk about the fjords in Norway, or when they think of Norway, they think of the mountainous fjords. Some of the most famous fjords in the world, like I'm not going to be able to pronounce it correctly, the Sognefjorden, which is 127 miles long, is a fjord in Norway. So if you ever want to go there and take pictures of it, well, here you go. Here's the fjords. The land, the soil, throughout the country is mostly very hard rock. It's going to be mostly granite, some slate, and some sandstone, but it's going to be a very rocky country. Why? Because it's mostly mountains. And when you have a country that is full of mountains, you have ground that is lots of rock. Also, remember, it's right along the Arctic Circle. There's parts of it that are going to be under and parts of it that are going to be above. Well, the parts that are above the Arctic Circle are going to be tundra, which means they're going to have permafrost, which means even if you did have dirt, it's going to be rock hard. It's going to be frozen solid almost all year long. So the country is going to have a pretty diverse topography. It's going to be up and down, and it's going to be very cold and very warm in climate, because you're going to have some in the Arctic and some down in the subarctic, remember, warmed by the Gulf Stream, just like Sweden. And so when we begin to talk about the climate, the southern and western parts of Norway are going to be fully exposed to the Atlantic. So they're going to have lots of precipitation. So the climate in Norway is affected by the way that it kind of juts out there off of the peninsula. We can go back and look at our map here, and we can see how it just kind of pokes out here. It's the leading edge of that Scandinavian peninsula. And because it's the leading edge of that peninsula, it's going to kind of catch the brunt of the Atlantic storms. So it's going to have a heavier rainfall, more precipitation than some of the places that are further inland. Areas of east of the coastal mountains are going to be in the rain shadow. It's kind of like the deserts out in Nevada. There's mountains in California that catch all the precipitation coming in off the ocean. And so on the other side of those mountains, you have a very dry or arid area. It's going to be dry here on the other side of those mountains that are along the coast of western Norway. So you get to the east of those Scandinavian mountain ranges and you're going to have drier areas. Not desert, but just drier areas. So you're going to have parts of Norway that have lots of rain and parts of Norway that have not quite so much. So when we begin looking at the different places, there are places in Norway, just like in Sweden, where the sun will never set. In fact, in Oslo, because it's so high up, the capital of Norway, which we'll see when we look at our political map in just a minute, there will be times during the year where the sun never sets. And it's going to kind of do the same thing that we talked about last week, where the sun will rise up, it'll be high in the air, and then when it would normally set, it'll just kind of come down and hover above the horizon and skirt along the horizon and go back up. So it's almost like it's dawn, and then it's high noon, and then dawn and high noon, and dawn and high noon, and the sun just never sets. So there'll be times where they have daylight almost 24 hours a day, 20 hours of daylight a day in Oslo during the summertime. And so there's going to be, because there's this wide variety of climate, there's also going to be a wide variety of biodiversity. There are like 16,000 different types of insects, different species of insects that live there. And there are many more that we haven't described or that we haven't figured out exactly where they go, and they expect there to be lots more that we are still discovering. There are over 20,000 species of algae, almost 2,000 species of lichen, 1,000 species of moss. It just goes on and on and on. There's lots of biodiversity, especially when you're getting into plants and insects. There's not quite so many mammals, simply because the climate doesn't allow. It's going to be a very cold climate, so it doesn't allow for a great deal of diversity when it comes to different types of animals or mammals. And so there's going to be about 90 different types of mammals that live there, many different types of fish, freshwater and saltwater fish. And there's going to be many different types of invertebrates like crab and other types of things, clam, mussel. And so there's lots and lots and lots of biodiversity. When it comes to the environment, when we're talking again, what does it look like, you can see in this picture there is a lot of stunning scenery, very dramatic scenery, where you have these mountains that have been cut through by glaciers or by other tectonic movements or other catastrophic or cataclysmic events where it just cuts these grooves through these mountains. And so you have mountains with these just stunning peaks rather than gradual building up to a top. You have mountains with just dramatic cliff faces, very, very stunning visually. There are also many rivers and many oxbows and many bends that are going to be going through here, and the fjords are going to be beautiful throughout Norway. Norway is very, very famous for its dramatic scenery. Many times to film movies, when you want these, cliff faces and these beautiful picturesque mountains, people will go to Norway to get those kinds of shots, as long as you can have snow in them, because it's cold in Norway. And so it just has this beautiful, beautiful countryside. In fact, in 2012, it was ranked as the third most beautiful place in the world. It is the world's top, according to National Geographic, the fjords in Norway are the world's top natural tourist attraction. And so people come from all over the universe, yes, universe, to see the geography of Norway. It's just beautiful. The politics of Norway is going to be similar to that of Sweden, and that they're going to have a democratic monarchy. Now, the difference between the two and between many countries in the world is that Norway is going to have what is called a united state. It's a unitary state. And we'll get into more what that means in just a minute. The guy that you see on the slide, it's the king of the Norway, Harald V, King of Norway since 1991. Looks like a chipper fellow, happy man, red tie, very nice. Better if it was a bow tie, but whatever. And so what we're going to see is a country with a constitution that is similar to the United States Declaration of Independence, or inspired by the Declaration of Independence and other aspects of the French Revolution. And so it's going to have a divided government. government where you're going to have an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch, similar to other things. The legislative branch is going to be unicameral, which again, remember, is there's one body. It's not like we have the House of Representatives and the Senate in the United States. They're going to have one body. It's called the Grand Assembly in English. In Norwegian, it's something I can't pronounce. So there's going to be the king, who acts kind of like our president does, except he's the king, and he doesn't get elected. It goes through secession, so he's the king, the head of the executive branch. Then you're going to have the Grand Assembly, which is the legislative branch, and then you're going to have the judicial branch, which will carry out the functions of the judiciary. The monarch will have, again, the executive power, and he doesn't have the ability to meddle with the other aspects. So the monarchy is limited in some respects. He doesn't have absolute power. And so it's going to be a limited monarch within a democratic structure. When you get to the Grand Assembly, we don't elect the king, but you elect the Grand Assembly. There are 19 political divisions in Norway, which you can see in the map over here, all these pretty colored divisions, which you do not need to know the names of because, again, they're in Norwegian, very difficult to pronounce. The only thing that I want you to know off this map is I want you to know where Oslo is. Oslo is located right down here. You go around the leading edge of this peninsula and up into this elbow here, and there's Oslo up here in these fjords and along these gaps or juts into the nation. So there's Oslo right there. There'll be a bigger picture of this map on the website. So if you go to stephenkovell.com/world-geography, you'll be able to find a picture of this map on that page so that you can look at it, open it up and look at it and see how all these different geographical or administrative regions fit together, and so that you can find Oslo, because you're going to need to know where the capital is. These administrative regions are not states. It is, again, a unitary state, which means that the entire country is run from the federal government, from the national government. It's not a federal government, from their national government. A federal government is where you have states, sovereign states, like Texas, Florida, New Mexico, and they are linked together through a federation. And so in our country, we have a federal government. The United States government is a federal government. It links the states together in a federation, which is why we call it the federal government. So our country is made up of independent sovereign states that are linked together by a federal government. And within each state, the state government is sovereign. It has the ability to decide what it's going to do, how, why, and when. In places like Norway, where it is a unitary state, the centralized government makes the decisions for everything. Now, it can delegate authority to these different administrative regions, but they're not states. It would be more like a county in our country. It'd be more like a county within the state of Texas, or these administrative regions within the nation of Norway. So the central government in Norway is very powerful. These 19 administrative regions will elect democratically members to the Grand Assembly. The way it's divided up is there are 169 members in the Grand Assembly, and there are 150 seats that are given to each one of these regions based upon population. So if you live in a place where there's more people, you get more representation. That way all the people are weighted equally. And there's 150 of those seats. Then those 19 additional seats are what they call leveling seats. And so the parties, out of the 150 parties, the parties with the most representation get additional seats. They get leveling seats because the people have spoken and they want this party to have more power, and so they're given additional seats within the government. And the way it works is kind of complicated with all their laws and regulations, but you just get more seats if you do better in the elections. And so the elections are very important, not just in your administrative region, but nationwide, so that you can get more votes for whatever party you believe in. And so it kind of encourages voting even in a sparsely populated area, because you want your party to get those additional seats. Inside the Grand Assembly, they're going to have, kind of like we have, the Senate Majority Leader and the Speaker of the House, they're going to have a Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister is going to be the head of the governing body, the legislative body. The Prime Minister is going to nominate the government or the cabinet, who will work with the prime minister to do all the duties that their legislative branch does. The legislative branch in Norway also gets to impeach, kind of like our legislative branch in the United States has the power to impeach government officials. It can impeach members of the judiciary, it can impeach not the king in Norway, but it can impeach members of the government, and in our country, the legislative body can impeach the president. Similar to the way our country works, being impeached doesn't mean that you're removed. Bill Clinton, back in the 1990s, was impeached, but he was not removed from office. All the impeachment does is it makes it possible, there's some fault found with your actions, and it makes it possible then for the government to decide if they want to remove you, and they might have a separate hearing to do that. And so all of these different things about Norway are very similar to ours, and we would expect that because their government is based off of or modeled after the United States and the government that was established in the French Revolution. So these administrative divisions, again, they're not states, they're more like counties. The one you need to know in particular is Oslo. It'll be the capital. The city of Oslo is its own administrative center. And there's the Ankershus administrative county. And so there's two. You're going to need to know Oslo and you're going to need Ankershus. And again, you'll be able to see those when you blow that map up. Oslo is its own, and it's also within one because there's so many people who live in the capital compared to the other regions. So now we're going to get kind of to the judicial system, how their judicial systems work. Norway uses a civil law system where the laws are created in parliament and the system is regulated through courts of justice throughout Norway. There's a Supreme Court with 19 justices. You thought we had a lot in our country. There are 19 in Norway, and there are appellate courts or appeals courts, and they do kind of the same thing that ours does, where they set they set kind of the standard for what actions are legal or illegal. Works kind of the same way. Norway, again, because it's a unitary state, it has a national police service, which is regulated by the centralized government, and the national police service goes out and does all the things that local police offices would do or state police offices would do. And so the Norway National Police are kind of like the Texas State Troopers. It's the state police, and they pretty much have jurisdictional authority everywhere throughout the state. Just like a state trooper has jurisdictional authority everywhere in the state, they can do their job anywhere. And so that's kind of how their judicial system is set up. It's going to be maintained by that centralized government. The military in Norway is small. There's about 25,000 people in the Norwegian military, including civilian employees. So there just aren't a whole bunch of soldiers, but there's only like 5 million people, so they don't have a lot of soldiers. The king is the commander-in-chief of the army, being the executive head of the executive branch, and you can see in his picture here, it's people with military uniforms behind him. And so it's very similar in the way that the president is the commander-in-chief of the United States military. The military is controlled not by somebody in the military, but there is somebody outside of it. In our country, a civilian, in this country, the monarch, who is ultimately responsible for directing the military. And that kind of separates powers there, so you don't wind up with a military state, like a fascist state or something like that. And so it's going to be kind of set up where the king will have advisors, just like our president has advisors of a chief of, joint chiefs of staff, people who will advise him on how to handle things. And the king will also be in charge of foreign relations, dealing with foreign dignitaries and things like that. And so that's kind of how the politics and the government is set up in Norway. The economy in Norway is actually pretty impressive. When you look at some of the numbers that we're going to start talking about and some of the concepts that we're going to start talking about, it makes you almost want to move to Norway if it wasn't so cold. The Norwegians enjoy the second highest GDP, gross domestic production or gross domestic product, per capita in the world. So today, Norway is the second wealthiest country in the world in terms of monetary value, and they have the largest amount of money stockpiled out of any nation in the world. They are just brimming with money over in Norway. it's unbelievable how much money they have stockpiled in Norway. We'll get to that in more of a minute. But Norway has first place in the world in the Human Development Index, which means they take very good care of their people. And lists put together by companies that project the stability of a government, how quickly a government is going to collapse or a country's economy is going to collapse, always put Norway at the end. They think that Norway is the least likely country to collapse in the world. That's how stable and how powerful their economy is. And when we think about people or countries competing with the United States economically, we typically don't think of Norway, but we should. They are an economic powerhouse. Now, they have a pretty mixed economy. They're a capitalist, welfare state and a social democracy. What that means is that they offer welfare for people. They're a capitalist, which means that you go and you work and you earn money, but there are also welfare programs available. And there is a social democracy, which means that the government provides social functions, but the people are democratically elected. So that's kind of how their country is going to operate as far as how they deal with money. The Norwegian economy is mostly going to be derived from natural resources. There's going to be gas and oil production, and there's going to be agricultural production. And so there's a lot of different ways that the economy is going to work. In Norway, when you have a child, you get 46 weeks of paid leave. You get off for almost a whole year. In our country, you're lucky if you get 6 weeks. In Norway, you get 46. There's a lot of things that you're going through. You're going to see it's just pretty neat when you look at their economy. They have one of the lowest employment rates in the world. 2.6% of the people in Norway are not working. Everybody else is. It's amazing how, again, I'm going to keep using that word amazing because it's just so neat to see how their country works. 30% of the people in Norway work for the government, because remember, you have that centralized government that runs everything. And the hourly productivity levels, as well as the average wage, the average hourly wage in Norway, are among the highest in the world. Another interesting fact about Norway is that the CEO of a company and the lowest paid person in a company don't make very much different salaries. Now, the CEO, of course, is going to get paid more, but compared to the difference that you see in the United States, where you might have somebody working at a company for, $15 an hour, and then the CEO is going to get paid thousands of dollars an hour, you don't see that kind of disparity in Norway. It's much more egalitarian. It's people are provided for in a much more equal way. Another interesting difference is that the state is going to own a large amount of the different economies or the different producing agricultural natural production companies in Norway. They don't own all of them. It's not state-owned, but the state has invested its money into these different corporations and various corporations throughout the world, which is one of the reasons why the government in Norway is so wealthy. They estimate that the government in Norway has a retirement fund for the people in Norway, which is worth almost $900 billion. And they estimate that it will continue to grow and grow and grow, making Norway one of the most cash-rich countries in the world. It has more cash on hand than any other country in the world. Another thing it does is it buys other countries' debts. And so when other countries like ours can't get their spending under control and they have to borrow money, Norway is one of those countries that lends money out so that they continue to get paid interest off of the money that they lend. It's very wise. Rather than spending more than they've got, they lend extra that they have, and so they're able to continually make money off of what they've invested. When we look at the income or the revenues for their country, about a quarter of the money they make comes from petroleum, and that's only going to increase in the foreseeable future. So much of their income comes from natural gases, oil, things like that. Export revenues are more than 20% of their GDP. So the money that's produced in Norway, more than a fifth of it comes from exports of things like oil and natural gas. So again, a great deal of their economy depends on natural resources. As far as August, we talked about their money already. As far as August 2014, $900 billion US dollars saved up in that fund for their people. Also interesting in Norway is, even though there's lots of mountains, much of their economy is based on agriculture. You can look here on this map here, and the peach color or the salmon color are predominantly crop and pasture lands, and so there's going to be a lot of grazing or cropland in those regions. It's a pretty significant part of the habitable region of Norway. The green part are forests, which they'll use for timber and other types of natural resources that they'll be gleaning from their forests. And then there are also hardwood and other types of trees up here that they're able to use and export. Norwegian wood is famous throughout the world for being used in furniture and other types of things. Oil fields, as far as growth in their oil industry, since around the late 1960s, they've drilled almost 5,100 oil wells. So mostly in the North Sea, and they're continuing to grow. They're mass producing. I mean, they're just actively producing, and there's no end in sight as far as they can continue looking at their oil reserves and their gas reserves. It's just going to continue to grow. They're a very prosperous, very wealthy nation. Because they're a very wealthy nation, they're able to invest in the infrastructure of their country. Well, they spend a lot of money on roads. They spend a lot of money on mass transport. They spend a lot of money on airlines and things like and similar things, moving people about their country. It's very difficult to get our government to spend money on things like that. Because our government struggles to balance its budget. States trying to deal with balancing their budgets, getting money from that federal government. So it's very, very complicated, very difficult. Whereas the national government in Norway, when they decide that it's time to build roads, they don't have to deal with any other government entities. They just decide it's time to build roads, and they've got more than enough money to do it. And so the public transportation in Norway is very well designed, it's well implemented, and it's well used. And that helps their economy, because you can live in Norway and not have to spend your money on a car and on gas and things like that. And so you wind up being able to spend more money on things that you want and on things that you need. It's a very interesting economy. It's a very solid economy. Again, in the top when it comes to production, in the number one spot when it comes to cash on hand, and the very last spot when it comes to likelihood of collapse. And so if you want to move somewhere where it's a good, solid economy, Norway's not a bad place. Neither is Texas. Texas is pretty awesome. The other states in our union kind of drag us down, but Norway is a very economically sound country. Religion in Norway consists primarily of a state religion, which is the Church of Norway, and again, very much like Sweden, is Lutheran in nature. It's established in the 1500s when the Protestant Reformation is beginning, and when Martin Luther nails those 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg, and that's kind of when it begins as well. 65% or so 77% or so of Norwegians are counted as being members of the Church of Norway, but fewer than 20% of the people say that religion is important to them. And so what you kind of have is very much in the same way that you had people in Sweden just being born and baptized into the religion because you're supposed to. You kind of have that in Norway too, but their religion doesn't play an active role or an important role in their life. In the 1990s and 2000s, less than 5% of people would attend religious services, or customarily or religiously, to use the word. It's just something that doesn't seem to be very important. More than 10% of the population is unaffiliated with any kind of religion, and the number one religion that isn't Christian or wouldn't be called Christian is Islam, and there are over 100,000 people in Norway who practice Islam. And within Norway, there's actually a lot of stress and friction with the Muslims who live there, and some of the more recent events that put Norway onto the national news deal with terrorist activities or Norwegians actually fighting back against Islam. And so there are some tense religious situations in Norway. But like other places that are controlled by the state, there's a gradual decline in the state religion because people just aren't interested in it. Other groups that are not state mandated or state supported actually have higher attendance, and more people in those groups say that religion is important to them because those are choices that the people have made for themselves rather than just kind of defaulting in to a religion or a way of life. And so that's kind of going to be Norway in a nutshell. We've talked about the geography, we've talked about the politics, the economy, we've talked about religion and people in general. And remember that the number one language spoken in Norway is Norwegian, because that's probably going to be on a quiz that you have at some point in the future. Remember, look at the map, find Oslo. If you need to go back and watch the video again, do that, because all of this information is going to be coming up on tests that you guys are going to have. All right, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday.